My brothers, my sisters, welcome back to the channel. Today we speak not just of Burkina Faso, but of Africa's awakening. If you believe in freedom, unity, and the power of our people, then make sure you subscribe. Share this story, and let the world hear Africa's voice. Because what you are about to witness is not just history, that is destiny. The rain fell differently that night, not like a storm, but like a confession. Each drop hit the marble tiles of the presidential courtyard with a sound that seemed to whisper names. Names of men who had vanished, of contracts signed in shadows, of truths too dangerous to speak. In the silence between thunder, a figure moved through the dim corridors of the palace. Her white cleaning uniform was soaked, her footsteps light, deliberate. She paused before a portrait, Ibrahim Traoré, the young soldier who had defied the world's order and inherited its wrath. To most, she was invisible, a woman pushing a cart of cleaning supplies, collecting dust and secrets alike. But to a select few in Washington, she was Asset 9, embedded deep within the heart of a defiant regime. Her mission was simple on paper: observe, report, and wait for the fall. Yet on that night, something shifted. The air was thick with tension, and the hum of the ceiling fans could not drown the unease creeping through the halls. Inside the presidential study, the power flickered, once, twice, and then darkness swallowed the room. When the lights returned, Traoré stood alone before his desk, his eyes tracing the faint outline of something out of place, a small, black camera lens glinting beneath a lamp. His heart did not race. It sank. That was the moment it began, the unraveling of a deception too vast to imagine. A story not of war, but of silence. Not of invasion, but of infiltration. And what Ibrahim Traoré uncovered next would expose the empire itself, Burkina Faso, land of upright people. A nation once rich in spirit, now scarred by the invisible wounds of debt, sabotage, and despair. The world called him a dictator, a rebel, a threat. But in the quiet mornings, when the city was still asleep, Ibrahim Traoré was just a man sitting on a balcony, staring at a horizon that refused to brighten. He had come to power not through ambition, but necessity, inheriting chaos where order had collapsed, poverty where promises had rotted. The West had offered him help, but their hands were lined with knives. Aid came with contracts. Sanctions came with lectures. Every solution carried a cost, and every debt was designed to deepen. The IMF had strangled nations with polite smiles and restructuring programs. They called it stability. He called it slow death. In the beginning, Traoré believed he could reform the system from within. He attended meetings, signed papers, gave speeches about cooperation. But soon, his advisors vanished. His reforms were blocked, and the gold of Burkina, the lifeblood of his people, began to disappear under international oversight. He realized too late, the enemy wasn't on the battlefield. It was in the handshake. Inside the palace, the walls listened. Every phone call clicked faintly. Every email seemed to echo before it reached its destination. His chief of security swore their systems were clean, yet leaks kept surfacing. Details only known within those marble walls appearing in foreign news reports. It began small. A memo about resource negotiations appeared online. Then, footage of private cabinet meetings surfaced on international channels. Nothing explosive, just enough to embarrass, to create doubt, to chip away at legitimacy. That was when Traoré noticed her, the maid. She had been there for months, maybe longer. Always quiet, her movements precise, almost mechanical. She spoke little, avoided attention, and carried herself with the obedience of someone invisible by design. At first, he barely registered her. In a palace of hundreds, one more servant meant nothing, but soon he began to see the pattern. Every time a meeting ended, she was there, dusting the same desk he had just used, collecting papers accidentally left behind, adjusting items she had no reason to touch. Once she apologized for spilling water on a power outlet. Twice she entered his study when he was absent. Still, suspicion felt paranoid until the night he found the camera. That discovery ignited something dark in him. Not anger, but understanding. He'd seen this before. In his military days, he'd studied tactics of espionage, the use of service staff, contractors, and charity liaisons as information conduits. What startled him wasn't that a spy existed. It was that she had been sent so deep, so quietly, without anyone around him knowing. Someone powerful wanted to know everything. His routines, his visitors, his vulnerabilities. And not for curiosity, for control. The next morning, Traoré carried on as usual. Cabinet meetings continued. Press statements were made. The maid still polished the silver. But beneath the surface, the stage was shifting. He instructed his cyber unit to sweep the palace discreetly. Within 24 hours, they discovered 3 hidden microphones, one beneath a table, another in a light fixture, and one cleverly embedded in a framed map of Africa. Every one of them transmitted to a foreign frequency, encoded, sophisticated, unreachable. He didn't react publicly. He didn't accuse. He waited. Meanwhile, the people outside the palace were struggling, markets empty, hospitals dark, children fainting in schools without food. The nation's gold was mined, but the profits vanished overseas. When Traoré demanded fair trade, new rebels appeared overnight, armed, funded, trained by unknown groups. The maid moved among all of this unnoticed. She watched his exhaustion grow, the lines deepen beneath his eyes. She knew what the reports called him: anti-Western, militant, authoritarian. But she also saw the man who stayed awake reading letters from widows and orphans. Some nights, she lingered outside his study, watching the flicker of light under the door as he wrote notes in silence. Was she feeling guilt or curiosity? She couldn't tell, because deep within her pocket lay a small transmitter. And on its surface, engraved in faint lettering, was the mark of the agency she could never name aloud. Days passed. The atmosphere thickened. Every step inside the palace began to echo with suspicion. Traoré's generals argued over loyalty. His ministers avoided his eyes. Rumors spread. Whispers of a coup, of a betrayal from within. The Western media amplified it, feeding the world a narrative of chaos. And the maid? She continued to clean, to dust, to listen. But she wasn't the only one being watched anymore. Hidden within the walls, Traoré's new intelligence unit recorded her movements. The world's most powerful spy network, undone by its own arrogance. Late one evening, a storm rolled over Ouagadougou. Lightning carved the sky, thunder rolling like distant drums. In the dim light of the palace kitchen, the maid sat alone, trembling hands holding a microdrive. It contained data she didn't understand, encryption keys, meeting logs, maps. All of it prepared for extraction, but as she stared at the drive, her reflection in the metal sink looked back like a stranger. Who was she really serving? She thought of the children she'd seen begging outside the markets, the mothers waiting for grain shipments that never came. The report said this was all Traoré's fault, but she had lived here. She had seen the hunger, the emptiness, the sabotage that came from elsewhere. For the first time, the mission felt wrong. Outside, a voice called her name. Soft, commanding. She jumped, clutching the drive close, then hid it beneath a towel. No one saw the tears fall from her eyes. In the upper halls, Traoré stood by a window overlooking the storm. He could feel it, a quiet war unfolding beneath his own roof. His nation wasn't being invaded by armies, but by whispers, by bribes, by silence. He thought of Thomas Sankara, the revolutionary who dreamed of a self-reliant Africa and died for it. The parallels haunted him. He knew the game now. Every great African leader who rejected the script was either killed, exiled, or discredited. And now, it was his turn. But what the world didn't know was that Ibrahim Traoré had been preparing for this moment his entire life. The next morning, his security chief approached him with quiet urgency. They had traced a signal, faint, intermittent, but foreign. It originated from inside the palace and led to a satellite channel tied to a US military relay in Djibouti. Traoré didn't speak. He simply nodded. The web was real. The deception was deeper than imagined. Yet he did not want to arrest her. Not yet. He wanted the truth to expose itself, because the truth, he knew, was a weapon far deadlier than any bullet. So he waited, watched, planned. Each day, the maid went about her duties, folding linens, dusting the globe in his office, sweeping floors. Each night, Traoré's intelligence unit quietly mirrored every transmission she made. The game had reversed. The hunter had become the observed. And with every secret she sent, she dug the grave of her mission deeper. Days turned into weeks. A foreign journalist arrived, claiming to have sources exposing corruption in Traoré's government. Documents appeared online, fabricated memos, altered signatures. It was a prelude, a psychological strike designed to justify international action. But this time, the trap was already set. And the bait was perfect. That night, Traoré placed a classified document, entirely false, on his desk. A plan for a covert weapons shipment to Russia. Only one person would ever see it, the maid. As she entered the study, her eyes lingered too long on the papers. Her hands trembled slightly as she polished the desk, and in that tremor, the fate of an empire shifted. Because the moment she copied that file, the transmission pinged. And miles away, in a data center under the flag of another nation, a red light blinked, signaling an active leak. In that instant, the stage was set for revelation. The storm outside broke again. The lights flickered, and within the golden halls of the palace, betrayal prepared to meet its reckoning. Morning arrived, but the air inside the palace felt heavier than before, as if the walls themselves were bracing for what was about to unfold. The rain had passed, leaving the city washed and silent, yet nothing felt clean. Ibrahim Traoré stood before his window overlooking Ouagadougou, a city caught between rebirth and ruin. Smoke from cooking fires drifted through the morning haze, mixing with the faint hum of generators that refused to die. He could see children walking to school barefoot, soldiers standing guard with rifles older than their fathers, and markets where every coin exchanged felt like an act of faith. In that fragile calm, he knew something profound, that revolutions weren't destroyed by bullets anymore. They were suffocated by information, by stories twisted in foreign rooms, by spies disguised as servants. Down the corridor she moved as she always did, quiet, efficient, and unseen. The maid, the spy, the observer of power. Her eyes were hollow now, her sleep fragmented by guilt and fear. The weight of what she carried pressed into her bones. Every coded message she sent to her handlers made her stomach tighten, but habit was stronger than remorse. She told herself she was only following orders. That it wasn't her place to question the mission, that the man she watched, the one who spoke of dignity and sovereignty, was just another piece in a global game. Yet, with every passing day, the lines blurred. She watched him refuse luxury cars, eat with soldiers, visit wounded civilians without cameras. He didn't live like the monster her reports described, and that terrified her more than anything, because it meant she was betraying not a tyrant, but a man who still believed. The data she had copied, the fake document planted by Traoré, had already been sent. Across oceans, it reached screens in Washington, London, and Paris. To the architects of control, it was proof. Burkina Faso is supplying weapons to Russia. The gears of manipulation began to turn instantly. Intelligence memos circulated. Journalists received leaks. Think tanks drafted statements about regional destabilization. In elegant conference rooms, people she'd never met decided the future of a nation she barely understood. They prepared sanctions, statements, condemnations, all based on the very file Traoré had crafted to expose them. And far away, the man they called impulsive and dangerous smiled in silence, because every move they made would soon betray their own hand. Inside the palace, he was patient, too patient. Each hour was a performance, each glance a test, the maid's nerves frayed under invisible pressure. She could feel eyes on her, though she could never find them. Every corridor felt longer, every locked door more accusing. Once she caught a soldier watching her too closely. Another time, a security agent followed her through the market under the guise of coincidence. The web was tightening, and she could feel the silk sticking to her skin. But the story unfolding wasn't just about espionage. It was about Africa's invisible war, the one fought not with guns but with policies, currencies, and propaganda. Burkina Faso had dared to stand alone, to reject IMF control, to trade gold for dignity, and in doing so, it had become a target. Traoré's government was under siege from within, NGOs planting narratives, rebel groups armed with foreign steel, media headlines designed to fracture his image. Every institution meant to help was a hidden hand pressing him down. He saw it clearly now. The maid was only the smallest piece of a colossal machine, and if he could expose her, the machine itself would be forced into the light. One evening, he summoned his intelligence chief and handed him a sealed envelope. No words were exchanged. Inside it were coordinates, access logs, and timestamps of every transmission made from the palace. He wanted everything tracked, not just who she sent the data to, but who received it, where it went next, and how fast it spread. They began quietly mapping a global relay of espionage. The signals bounced across continents, from Ouagadougou to Djibouti, then London, Virginia, Brussels. The deeper they traced, the clearer the pattern became. It wasn't a rogue operation. It was an orchestrated campaign. The same network that destabilized other nations was now turning its full weight against Burkina Faso. The maid, meanwhile, began to unravel. Her reports became shorter. Her tone shifted. She hesitated before sending data. Once, she stared at a transmission window for 10 full minutes, trembling, unsure whether to press send. In her mind, two worlds collided, the cold commands of Washington and the human faces of the people she saw starving outside the palace gates. She'd been told Traoré was corrupt, that his resistance to foreign policy was pride, not principle. But pride didn't rebuild schools. Pride didn't pay teachers. Pride didn't spend sleepless nights reading letters from mothers whose sons had died in the desert. No, she had seen the truth now. And truth, once seen, cannot be unseen, but redemption rarely comes easy. Her hesitation was noticed. Somewhere across the ocean, a supervisor flagged her behavior as inconsistent. They sent her a warning, disguised as an ordinary update. Inside, it was a single line: "You are being evaluated." Her hands shook as she read it. She understood what it meant. Failure was not tolerated. Loyalty was not optional. Meanwhile, the disinformation war outside intensified. Western networks released exclusive leaks, claiming Traoré was funding extremist cells, hiding gold in private vaults, collaborating with banned states. All of it based on the forged document she had stolen. International leaders condemned him publicly. Aid agencies suspended shipments. Burkina Faso's economy strained under new restrictions. For the people, hunger returned like a ghost that never left. For the palace, pressure became suffocating. But in the darkest hours, Traoré's calm deepened. Because chaos, he knew, was the enemy's overconfidence manifesting itself. They had acted too quickly, too predictably. And now, he had proof that the entire world's narrative was built on lies. The maid began to sense that something was wrong. Each time she entered the study, she could feel the air shift, colder, watchful. The documents on his desk no longer looked carelessly placed. They looked arranged. She started checking her equipment, microphones, transmitters, but found them untouched. Still, something inside her screamed that she had been discovered. Every night, she woke to phantom footsteps in the hall. Every morning, she checked her drawers for signs of intrusion. The hunter had become prey, though she didn't yet know it. Then, one night, her handler's final message arrived. It was brief, too brief. "Retrieve the master file. End operation. Extraction soon." There was no signature, no code phrase, no assurance of safety. Just a command, and silence. Fear tightened around her throat. She didn't know what extraction meant anymore. In her line of work, it could mean rescue or erasure. Still she moved, because hesitation was death. She packed her transmitter, microdrive, and false identification. Her hands trembled as she walked toward the presidential office one last time. But what she didn't know, what she could not have known, was that every camera in the palace was now hers. The eyes she thought she used to watch others were now turned upon her. That same night, Traoré sat in the control room surrounded by his intelligence team. Screens flickered with live feeds from hidden cameras. They watched her move silently through the corridors. Each step recorded, each breath documented. No anger flickered across his face. Only quiet sadness. He knew she was not the architect, only the instrument. But an instrument could still destroy an entire nation if left unchecked. At exactly 2:43 a.m., she entered his study. The room was dark, the air humming faintly with electricity. She reached beneath the desk, pulling out a small device she had hidden weeks before. Her fingers danced across its surface, transferring data, compressing files. Then, a flicker of light. The monitor on the wall activated, displaying lines of code streaming faster than she could comprehend. It wasn't the data she expected. It was her own transmissions, replaying back at her. Every message, every photo, every betrayal. Her heart stopped. The walls seemed to close in. From the shadows, a door opened. Footsteps echoed, slow, deliberate. Traoré stepped into the light, his uniform unbuttoned at the collar, fatigue written in every motion. No words were spoken. He simply looked at her, not with fury, but with the sorrow of a man who had finally confirmed his deepest suspicion. She fell to her knees, trembling. The transmitter slipped from her hands, clattering onto the marble floor. For a long moment, there was silence, the kind that precedes storms and revelations alike. And in that silence, every lie she'd lived began to suffocate her. Outside, thunder rolled again. The skies of Ouagadougou erupted, as if nature itself was bearing witness. Inside, Traoré pressed a button on his desk. Across the world, servers in 3 countries began to download the footage of the spy's exposure. The data logs, the forged files, the proof of manipulation. He wasn't going to execute her. He was going to expose the system that created her. The operation had turned inward. The empire had finally looked into its own reflection, and what it saw would soon shake the world. The maid wept silently as guards entered the room, but Traoré raised a hand, stopping them. There was nothing to punish, only truth to reveal. And truth, once freed, cannot be chained again. That night, the palace stood still, a monument of shadows holding its breath. The air tasted of rain and revolution. And though the spy's mission had ended, the real war of Africa's right had only just begun. The rains had stopped, but the tension had not. The red earth of Ouagadougou was cracked and dry again, like a wound that refused to heal. Inside the presidential compound, Ibrahim Traoré stood alone in his office, looking through a reinforced window that reflected both his face and the flag of Burkina Faso fluttering behind him. He had seen enough betrayals in his short years of power to last a lifetime. But this was different. For weeks, he had been playing a quiet game of chess. Every word the maid spoke, every room she cleaned, every tray she carried, was being watched. Ibrahim had suspected her long before, but it was not until the security chief, Colonel Ouedraogo, intercepted a faint encrypted transmission from the kitchen wing that the truth began to surface. The signal was traced not to any Burkinabé relay but to a U.S. diplomatic frequency, camouflaged. Within static and radio clutter, the voice on the recording, hers, the maid, Mariam to the staff, Mary to the Americans. She was a ghost within his walls. That evening, the sun sank into a molten haze, and Ouagadougou was swallowed by the hum of generators and cicadas. A convoy of armored vehicles rolled out from the compound, heading toward the outskirts, a cover mission to mask the real operation. Inside the main residence, only 3 remained awake. Traoré, the chief of security, and the maid. She polished the same spot on the marble floor, her face calm, her hands steady. Yet her heart, that was where the storm lived. The U.S. Embassy had gone silent since her last failed transmission. Trump's secret envoy, operating out of Dakar, had warned her, "If you fail, we'll make sure he never speaks again, and neither will you." But she had failed. And now, even the walls seemed to whisper her name. At 2:13 a.m., the motion sensors tripped. Cameras caught her slipping into the west corridor. where Traoré's private office and document vault were located. She carried a mop bucket, but inside was a modified transmitter, hidden beneath a layer of bleach. She moved with the quiet precision of someone trained in more than just cleaning. The American handlers had taught her, walk slow, breathe steady, don't look back. She reached the keypad. Her fingers trembled. She had memorized the code from an old video reflection, a mirror left slightly tilted in the corner of his desk. 6-1 to 9 to 8. The door clicked open. Inside, the room was dark except for a single lamp illuminating a stack of sealed diplomatic files. Gold contracts, foreign loan agreements, secret IMF correspondences, the kind of papers that could unmake a government. She set down her bucket, lifted a pen drive, plugged it in. The light turned red. Then, click, behind her, a voice. "I was wondering when you'd stop pretending to clean." She froze. Ibrahim Traoré stepped out of the shadow, his military jacket unbuttoned, face expressionless. The light from the lamp painted half his face in gold, the other half in darkness. For a moment, there was silence, the kind that can crush a soul. He didn't shout. He didn't move. He just looked at her, as if searching for something human behind her fear. "Who sent you?" Her lips parted, but no sound came. "Do you know what you're stealing?" He continued. "It's not gold. It's not secrets. It's hope. The hope of my people." Her eyes watered. "You don't understand," she whispered. "They said, if I didn't, you'd die?" He interrupted softly. "Then die for the truth, not for them." A sharp knock at the door broke the silence. Colonel Ouedraogo entered, weapon drawn. "Sir, the signal's been traced. They know she's compromised. We're getting transmissions from Washington." Washington. That name felt heavier than the gun in Ouedraogo's hand. Traoré stepped forward. "No blood," he said quietly. "Not yet. Let her speak." In the hours that followed, the palace transformed into a fortress. A command center was set up in the communications wing. Screens flickered with intercepted messages. The Americans were panicking. Their agent had been caught inside the presidential residence, and the timing was disastrous. The documents she had accessed contained something far more explosive than they imagined. Evidence of a covert operation to destabilize Burkina Faso's energy infrastructure, disguised as economic aid. In short, they were planning to starve the country into compliance, and the maid, her job was never to assassinate Traoré. It was to listen, to plant devices that recorded his private meetings, to relay his tone, his health, his doubts. A psychological profile meant to break him from within. As the truth spilled, so did tears. Mariam confessed everything: the recruitment, the training, the promises. She had been a domestic worker in Abidjan when a contractor approached her, offering her a US visa and medical treatment for her brother in exchange for light work in Burkina Faso. Light work, cleaning the president's home. She was told Traoré was dangerous, that he was planning to sell Africa's resources to Russia, that the US was protecting the continent. Lies layered upon lies, and yet, as she served him day after day, she had seen something else, a man eating the same food as his soldiers, walking the same dusty roads, refusing luxury. A man who spoke softly, but whose every word carried fire. She had begun to doubt the mission, but by then, it was too late. The night stretched on like a slow-breathing beast. By dawn, Traoré made a decision that would change everything. He ordered a live broadcast, but not of her capture. That would be too easy, too shallow. Instead, he would expose the system that created her. He drafted a speech, handwritten in silence. Every word was deliberate. He wasn't going to humiliate her. He was going to reveal the machinery behind her. When the cameras went live, he stood before the nation in a plain khaki shirt, the flag behind him, and the world watching. "They sent her," he said calmly, "to clean our floors, but really, to sweep away our sovereignty." The silence that followed was deafening. She came not as an enemy of Burkina Faso, but as a victim of those who trade poverty for power. They told her lies about me, and they told us lies about freedom. But today, I say this to those who think Africa is still their laboratory. He looked directly into the lens. Your experiment is over. The broadcast exploded across global media. For the first time, an African leader directly accused a Western power of espionage, with proof. Documents, transmissions, names. Washington denied everything, but the damage was done. In living rooms across the continent, people whispered his name, Ibrahim Traoré. Not just as a soldier, but as a symbol. The US revoked aid within hours. The IMF froze negotiations. European journalists were ordered to downplay the story. But in the villages, in the slums, in the dusty courtyards of Africa, people felt something ancient stirring, pride. But within that triumph brewed another storm. The revelation had made Traoré more powerful than ever, but also more targeted. The Americans weren't finished. They never were, and Mariam, the maid, sat alone in a cell beneath the compound, staring at her trembling hands. Her mission had failed, but her confession had changed the course of history. Above her, the sun rose over Ouagadougou, red and burning, like the color of redemption. The morning after the broadcast, the sky over Ouagadougou looked bruised, swollen with heat and dust, as if the heavens themselves were holding their breath. Inside the presidential command center, static crackled through the speakers. A dozen channels of noise, threats, warnings, silence, all at once. The world had turned its gaze toward Burkina Faso, and what it saw terrified it. In Washington, emergency meetings were held behind sealed doors. Reports labeled, Traoré, a destabilizing populist. A covert task force was authorized under the codename Glass Veil, a quiet operation to remove him before his message spread. In Paris, foreign correspondents were recalled. Military advisors withdrew from Ouagadougou's outskirts, pretending it was for security reasons. In Accra, Lagos, and Kinshasa, whispers grew louder. If he can stand up to them, maybe we can too. Traoré had started a fire he could no longer control. In the compound, the air smelled of iron and sweat. Traoré hadn't slept. The walls were lined with maps of communication cables, oil routes, and foreign bases, each red mark a reminder of how tightly Africa's veins were wrapped around the West's fingers. Colonel Ouedraogo entered, holding a sealed report. Sir, you should see this. Inside the file were satellite images, taken hours after the broadcast. Unidentified drones had been circling the capital. Not local, not regional. American-made. Traoré's jaw clenched. They'll try to silence us, he said quietly. Not because of what we did, but because of what we proved. That night, he addressed only his inner circle, 6 trusted soldiers, veterans of the revolution. The room was lit by oil lamps, the generator long shut off to avoid detection. They've declared a silent war, he said, voice low, deliberate. They'll come not with armies, but with shadows, journalists, envoys, drones, maybe even hunger. But we will not bend, Ouedraogo frowned. Sir, if they cut our aid, the people will suffer. There are already rumors of a food blockade. We can't fight sanctions with pride. Traoré turned toward the window, looking at the dark horizon. Then we'll fight with truth. He didn't mean propaganda. He meant evidence. Days passed. Then came the second betrayal. At dawn, a vehicle exploded outside the western gate. A delivery truck. Empty, except for a single recording device, and a note burned into the dashboard. You should have kept her silent. The blast injured 3 guards, but killed no one. It was a message, not an attack. But later that day, when Ouedraogo went to check the interrogation wing, he froze. Mariam's cell was empty. The door showed no signs of forced entry. No guards remembered seeing anyone enter. Cameras had been disabled for 14 minutes, exactly the length of a drone transmission cycle. She was gone. Traoré's heart sank deeper than fear. He had wanted to forgive her, to give her a chance to redeem herself through truth. Now she was missing, or taken. He ordered the borders sealed, flights grounded, and the investigation doubled. But inside, he already knew what had happened. The Americans had extracted her, or silenced her, to erase the last witness to their plot. For hours, he sat in silence, staring at her empty file on his desk. On the cover, her name was crossed out. Beneath it, written in pencil, was a single word: porn. He felt sick. Then came the storm. Within 48 hours, the IMF suspended Burkina Faso's loans. The European Union froze trade deals. Media outlets ran headlines. Traoré's regime spirals into chaos. US denies spy allegations, calls Burkina Faso a disinformation state. Rebel activity increases in northern provinces. Rebels. Always the same playbook, Burkina. Faso's borders trembled under the weight of insurgents suddenly armed with new weapons. Weapons marked with serial codes that could only come from Western arsenals. The goal was clear. Break him without touching him. Make his own people rise against him. But they underestimated the man who had nothing left to lose. One night, under a crescent moon, Traoré gathered his generals in the war room. Satellite feeds flickered on cracked screens, showing rebel movements converging toward the capital. He looked at the map and spoke slowly. If they want war, they'll have it. But not the kind they expect. He pointed to a nearby broadcasting tower, the same one used for his previous address. We're going live again. Not with words, with proof. From a hidden vault, he brought out the files Mariam had stolen but never transmitted. They contained leaked audio between US contractors and intelligence operatives discussing controlled destabilization of African governments. Code names, payment logs, satellite coordination times, enough to spark outrage across continents. But broadcasting them meant one thing: he'd sign his own death warrant. The following evening, the capital dimmed under an artificial blackout. The only light came from flickering lamps and cell phone screens. Then the transmission began. "This is not a revolution," Traoré's voice echoed through every device. "This is a revelation." The screen showed faces, blurred but undeniable, discussing containment strategies for African leaders prone to national independence. Then documents, voice recordings, intercepted messages, and finally, a photograph. Mariam, smiling weakly in a training facility marked with an American flag, her last trace. "They used her," Traoré said, his voice breaking slightly. "Like they've used Africa for centuries, clean hands for dirty work. But the era of silent obedience ends tonight." He stepped closer to the camera. "If I must fall for this truth to rise, then so be it." That was the moment the power grid went dark. Explosions rocked the outskirts, drone strikes aimed at the broadcast tower. But the signal had already mirrored across underground channels, encrypted and unstoppable. Within seconds, the files had spread to journalists in Mali, Ghana, and South Africa. The world saw everything. By dawn, foreign embassies in Burkina Faso had shut their gates. Panic rippled through diplomatic circles. The United Nations called for an immediate inquiry. Washington released a carefully worded statement about misinterpretation of private communications. But it didn't matter. The story had already escaped their control. In the streets, thousands gathered, chanting Traoré's name, not as a president, as a symbol of defiance. Women carried his portraits. Children waved flags stitched from old uniforms. Across the Sahel, soldiers who once fought under Western command now tore off their patches, swearing allegiance to sovereignty. Back in the compound, Traoré stood on the balcony, his eyes red from exhaustion. Smoke curled in the distance, a mix of fires and victory bonfires. Colonel Ouedraogo approached quietly. "They'll come again," he warned. "Harder this time," Traoré nodded. "Let them. The world now knows the face behind the mask." He looked toward the horizon, where the sun rose through a haze of gold and dust. "They thought one spy could silence Africa," he murmured, "but she only helped awaken it." For the first time in days, he smiled, not with triumph, but with understanding. The game was far from over. But for once, Africa was playing on its own terms. The sun rose over a city that no longer slept. Ouagadougou was quiet, not in fear, but in awe. The night before had changed everything. For the first time in modern memory, the small, landlocked nation of Burkina Faso had shaken the world without firing a single bullet, and at the center of it all stood a man who had dared to confront empires with nothing but truth. When dawn's light touched the cracked rooftops, the people gathered at Independence Square. a place once reserved for military parades and political speeches. Now it was filled with the sound of barefoot children running, of drums echoing against stone, of grandmothers whispering blessings for the nation. No one had ordered them to come. No posters, no police, just word of mouth, a spontaneous celebration born from the fire of awakening. From the compound balcony, Ibrahim Traoré watched in silence. His uniform was still stained with dust. His eyes were heavy, but the weight of the world seemed lighter that morning. The international response came like thunder after lightning. In Washington, the denial continued, louder, desperate. Officials claimed the recordings were deep fakes, that the broadcast was a Russian fabrication, but evidence mounted by the hour. The documents were real, the voices unmistakable. Even allies of the United States began to distance themselves, quietly asking questions that had been taboo for decades. In Africa, those questions turned into movements. From Dakar to Kinshasa, students marched with placards reading, "She cleaned for power, he cleaned the truth. We are not your experiment. Burkina Faso is not alone. Something was shifting, something ancient and unstoppable." Yet in the midst of this triumph, there was a shadow. The whereabouts of Mariam, the spy who became the spark, remained unknown. No country admitted to holding her. No grave was found. Some said she was taken back to the US, silenced forever. Others whispered she had escaped into the desert under a new name, haunted but free. Traoré never confirmed either story. But those close to him said he sometimes left food outside the palace gate at night. One plate, one cup of water, as if still feeding a ghost. Weeks passed. Sanctions hit. The IMF cut off funds. Western embassies quietly evacuated their staff. Burkina Faso's economy began to shake. Shelves emptied, hospitals strained, fuel lines grew long. The punishment was harsh, designed to break both leader and people. But the opposite happened. Farmers began trading locally. Mechanics repaired old trucks instead of importing new ones. Artists, teachers, and builders worked together, rediscovering an old rhythm, self-reliance. It wasn't easy. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. For the first time in generations, Burkina Faso's people began to see that survival itself was a form of resistance. The world's media called him reckless, defiant, dangerous. But the people gave him another name, the man who did not bow. And while diplomats fumed behind closed doors, others took notice, quietly, carefully. In Mali, Niger, and Chad, leaders met in secret to form a new regional bloc. One built not on loans and debts, but on shared independence, the Sahel Alliance. Its founding document bore a single line written by Traoré himself: "We cannot eat promises, nor build nations on permission." Months later, the United Nations held an emergency assembly. Representatives demanded answers for the destabilizing conduct of Burkina Faso. When Traoré's turn came, he walked to the podium alone. No bodyguards, no translator. His voice was calm, steady, like the hum of distant thunder. "They said I exposed secrets," he began. "But tell me, when a man hides poison in your food and you spit it out, are you the criminal?" The hall fell silent. "You accuse us of disobedience, but we only disobey chains. You call it rebellion. We call it breathing." Then he said something that would echo across continents. "If truth is treason, then let every African be guilty." The speech went viral. Even in the heart of Washington, college students quoted his words. Documentaries were made. Music videos sampled his voice. The same system that once painted him as a radical now feared the mythology it had accidentally created. And yet, Ibrahim Traoré remained grounded. He continued visiting villages, speaking with farmers, walking unguarded among his people. In the evenings, he returned to his office, the same room where the maid once stood with her hidden transmitter, and sat in silence. Sometimes, he would replay the old security footage. Not to relive the betrayal, but to remember. Because behind every act of deception, he had found something unexpected: redemption. Years later, a small memorial was built near the presidential compound. Not for Traoré, but for her, the spy who became a warning and a lesson. a bronze sculpture of a woman holding a broom in one hand and a broken transmitter in the other. The plaque beneath read, "Forgiven, not forgotten." Children played near it after school. Tourists stopped to take photos. But for the people of Burkina Faso, it was more than a statue. It was a reminder that even the tools of control could one day become symbols of freedom. And so, time passed. The nation changed, the economy rebuilt, not on foreign aid, but on its own soil. Farmers turned gold fields into grain fields. Engineers developed solar grids that powered remote villages. The road was long, painful, uncertain, but it was theirs. And Ibrahim Traoré, once mocked as naive, now regarded as fearless, became something larger than politics. He became legend. A story whispered in crowded buses and smoky bars, told from generation to generation. He faced the giants and did not blink. He was betrayed by a maid, but saved by the truth. He showed us that Africa's chains were made not of iron, but of lies. The camera of history pulled back, rising over the land, golden fields stretching to the horizon, rivers glittering under the setting sun. A narrator's voice, deep and haunting, closed the story. They tried to break a man. Instead, they awakened a continent, a pause. Then softly, she cleaned for power. He cleaned for truth. And together, without knowing it, they washed away an empire's illusion. The wind carried the last words across the Sahel, a whisper, a promise, a prophecy. Is this the moment Africa stopped kneeling and began to rise?